Here's the deadlift instructional video. I'm going to start off by outlining the basic body position. So you want a tight back, that means strong lumbar spine and thoracic spine. All the way through you want your back to be flat. Your shoulders should be positioned slightly forward of the bar, but not too far. Your hips as far back as possible and your shins as vertical as possible to put the load on the glutes and hamstrings, which are the major working muscles. From there you want to drive up through your heels, keeping your head in a neutral position, leading with the shoulders. People often refer to the hip hinge when talking about deadlifts, and as you can see, that's really what's going on here. You should think more about driving your hips forward and leading with your shoulders to lift the bar up. You want to use the leverage from your hips rather than yanking with your back. The reason for having quite a narrow foot position is that if you go out too wide, you'll end up having to move your hands out to compensate for that. And what that does is makes you pull from a lower starting position. When I set up, I find rolling the bar close to my shins and trying to push my knees back and hips back as far as possible is a great benefit. The idea behind this is making my center of gravity higher rather than lower as I take the slack off the bar, which means it doesn't have to move so far during the lift. Vimy uses a different starting position. His knees are further over the bar and his shins are less vertical. This means he uses more leg drive and his style looks more like a clean deadlift, as in the Olympic weightlifting movement. Here we're using mixed grip rather than double overhand for the deadlift because it's a heavier weight. What this does is prevents the bar from rolling one way. Remember, you're only using your hands as hooks, so keep your lats tight and make sure that you start from a symmetrical position so you're not off balance. Neither of us have noticed any muscle imbalances as a result of using mixed grip, but if you want to be sure that nothing's going to go wrong over time, then just alternate between sets. To see someone do a deadlift with correct form is one thing, but to understand what it feels like to do a deadlift with correct form is quite another. So a good way to learn how to do this is to get someone to hold a broomstick along your back. And as you set up for the deadlift, the points of contact that you want are the upper back and the hips, and possibly the back of the head. It will be indicated by the broomstick if your lower back is rounding or if your head's craning upwards too much, because obviously they will be the points of contact. I'm about to give you a few what not to do situations. The first of which is starting in a squat position with your arse too low. So basically that puts too much pressure on the quads, not enough stress on the hammies, so you're not really going to be using the deadlift for the muscles that it's intended to target. It's also going to be a weak, awkward position where your knees are in the way. Secondly, if you let your hips shoot up before your shoulders, then your weight will swing forward, which will be firstly an inefficient lift, and secondly a strain on your lower back, rather than having the load on your hammies. Thirdly, the rounded lumbar spine. This is something that you commonly see when people are trying to go too heavy too soon, and it can actually be avoided. So if you watch really good lifters, their form will be quite good even when they fail a lift. The last thing to avoid is hyperextension, because it often indicates weak glutes and puts a strain on the lower back, which is unnecessary. The deadlift in summary: tight back, especially the lumbar spine, shoulders just forward of the bar, shins as vertical as possible with the hips as far back as possible and raised so that you feel the tension in your hamstrings, neutral neck position, and lift up driving through the heels, leading with your shoulders. Deadlifts are an extremely taxing exercise when they're done at full intensity. So while you're learning, you can use lighter weight and higher reps, but eventually you're going to have to progress up to quite low reps and quite few sets as well. I would say between 1 and 5 sets, with 5 being the most you'd ever really need. Some 5x5 programs describe 5x5 for rows, for squats, for presses, and for bench press or pull-ups or whatever you're doing, but they still remain at 1 set for deadlifts purely because they are such a taxing exercise. Rep range from 3 to 8, so you can bust plateaus by kind of working on low reps and then working on high reps in weekly cycles, but doing 1 and 2 rep sets is more of a display of strength rather than an exercise that will gain you strength. Deadlifts should probably be performed no more than twice a week, and if you're doing them twice a week, then I would recommend having one lighter sesh where you focus on your technique and one heavier, more loaded session. One more note, and this is just on footwear: do not deadlift in running shoes. You're best off doing it in bare feet. If your gym doesn't allow that, get some Chuck Taylors or just some $10 Kmart shoes, whatever's flat and leaves you closest to the ground with the most stable base, because that's where you'll be strongest. Thanks for watching, and as always, feel free to inbox us with any questions you might have.